Good day, this is Mikhail Tank. Today I'm sitting at a table with a really special Rabbi, Ephraim Potash. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're originally from England.
I am.
Can you tell the audience what inspired you to become a rabbi and how the family is in the rabbinical works in general?
Well, it goes back to my childhood. My late father, of blessed memory, was actually born in Manchester, England, and he was not involved with the Hasidic movement at all, but a great Chabad, Lubavitch, Hasid, came to live in Manchester in 1928. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak Dubov, originating in Russia, actually immediately before, had come from Riga in Latvia. And he settled in Manchester and he became a teacher in the local Talmudical college and the rabbi of a synagogue near where my father lived. And my father was curious and went to this synagogue to see what this new inhabitant of Manchester looked like, and he was very impressed. He was one of these really, really spiritual rabbis and Hasidim, and he was so impressed that he decided to join that synagogue, and as a result he became attached to the Chabad Lubavitch Hasidic movement. Some years later he had a correspondence with the Lubavitch Rebbe, and you know, when parents tread a new path, very often their children are inspired to follow, and that inspired me to continue in his way, and I developed my own relationship with the Lubavitch Rebbe as a result.
And you also have quite a few sons who are rabbis as well.
Indeed.
And they practice in the Bay Area.
3 of them are in the Bay Area.
And even grandsons who may in the future be rabbis.
Well, my oldest grandson is 20 and he's already got his rabbinic ordination and he's heading in that direction.
Tell me, originally it was the Kohanim who were the chosen rabbis, is that correct?
Correct.
And how is it that, for example, in your family, there's this ongoing work? How do the children and the grandchildren, is it because they see it every day? How are they inspired to continue in that path?
I'll answer you in the following way. Some people describe Judaism as a religion. I don't like to see it in that way. I'd rather call it a way of life. The children are brought up with a Judaism that is a way of life. They see it all the time. Not in an oppressive way. It's just a natural way of living. And they go to Jewish schools, Hasidic schools, in our particular case Chabad, Lubavitch schools, and they're inspired to continue with the ideals of the movement. Some of them do pick it up and some don't. 2 of my sons are not rabbis, and chosen, although they're Orthodox Jews and they're Chabad, but they're not. They don't professionally have a rabbinic role. So the children pick it up, imbibe it through their pores, so to speak, P-O-R-E-S, and they will choose. Some are inspired enough to continue the way, others will go into business or whatever. We hope that they will remain Orthodox Jews.
Now, let's start with a really important question. What is really important to share with the world? And what is really important for you in being a rabbi?
Well, that's a very, very, very big question. I will attempt to answer it. Judaism sees itself as being a role of fulfilling a mission. That is to say, a God-given mission. We have to step back a little bit. We understand from our studies that we are in possession of a soul, and the soul is part of God. And God, in his wisdom, decided that he wants to send these highly spiritually charged entities called the soul into a physical world which is an antithesis to the soul. The physical world is only interested in the physical, the soul is interested in the spiritual. And God's mission to the soul, and the soul of all the Jewish people in particular, but perhaps all souls in general, is to include the physical world, which hitherto has been, so to speak, antithetical to anything spiritual, to include that in God's domain. So in a certain sense, when the soul comes down into the world, we're on a mission. And the mission is fulfilled by obeying the laws of the Torah, and there are many of them, 613 in total, learning the teachings of the Torah and sharing them with other people, whether Jew or non-Jew, because Judaism has a message to the non-Jewish world as well. So that's in short, how Judaism is seen.
What is that message?
What is the message? Well, there's two messages. One is for the whole world, the Gentile world. And actually this is very appropriate because we have a weekly reading from the biblical text. Yesterday's reading was from the book of Genesis. The second weekly reading is called Noah, in Hebrew Noach, and it's the story of the flood. And after the flood, which destroyed all of humanity except for 8 people, that was Noah and his 3 sons and their wives, God told them to leave the ark that was saving them from the mighty waters of the flood, and he gave them their marching order, so to speak: be fruitful, multiply, conquer the world. And included in that message, he gave them 7 laws, which are called the 7 laws of mankind, or the 7 Noahide laws. And these are very simple. There's a bit of an overlap with the 10 Commandments, but they're after you hear them, they're very obvious. One is to believe in God. That is obviously an absolute necessity, to know that the Creator, God, created the world. Not to worship idols or blaspheme against God. That is 2. 3, not to murder, not to steal, not to commit adultery or other immoral acts in that sphere. The 6th one is not to be cruel to animals or eat a living limb from an animal. That animal has to be dead before the meat is eaten. And the final one is to set up a system of justice and rule of law in society to make sure that these laws are kept and that society runs smoothly and civilly as we would want. So those are basically the 7 laws. That's the message of God to the whole of mankind. Who are the ones to spread this message? Well, anyone. But especially as we read about it in the Bible, the Jews somehow or other got that job as well of spreading this message. So that is on the one hand. On the other hand, the Jewish people themselves, as I mentioned earlier, have their own set of laws, which include these 7, by the way. They're not exclusive, they're included in them. But they are rather more numerous and complex. There are a total of 613 laws, 248 positive ones, meaning do. They're called the do's and the don'ts. Do this, do that. And the don'ts are the negative, what are called the negative commandments. Don't do this, don't do that. And that's 248 positive, 365 negative, making a total of 613. So that is the message that Jews have to Jews. Any Jew that knows this is charged with making sure that Jews that aren't aware of this also know it.
Thank you for sharing that. That's powerful information. Now, God can be creative and can be destructive. God can be kind and can be angry. How can people accept the fact that God has so many emotions and behaviors in that sense, as opposed to just being nice all the time, what people expect from God?
That's a very profound question, which is dealt with in Hasidic philosophy, where I mentioned earlier Chabad, Lubavitch. Chabad actually stands for, it's an acronym that stands for 3 Hebrew words: Chokhmah, Binah, Dat. The Chet is Chokhmah, which means wisdom. The Bet stands for Binah, understanding. And Dat means knowledge. That translation does not convey the full meaning of those words, but for the moment let that suffice.
It's 3 of the Sefirot, right?
Yes. Well, Dat is a kind of hybrid. Sometimes it's counted, sometimes it's not. But yes, I'll answer yes to that question. So, they're the intellectual Sefirot. What were the Sefirot we translate as the divine attributes. Then there are 7 emotional ones. In the Hebrew it's Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Hod, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. The rough translation is kindness, severity or restriction, beauty, victory, another kind of beauty, you call it splendor. Yesod means foundation, and Malchut, which means kingship. Now all of these need explanation, because just as words, they are not terribly meaningful. But Hasidic philosophy, focuses on all of these and attempts to expand and explain them. So, getting back to your point, which is how is it possible that God should show moods? So Hasidic philosophy explains that really God is constant. So let's use a parable to help explain what's going on. Let's take sunlight. Sunlight is a constant. The sun is shining. Let's not go into the spectrum now of, the scientists divide up the sun's light into various frequencies of radiation and so on. Let's leave that out for the moment. Sunlight is sunlight. However, if you're in a room and you have a stained glass window, there'll be red glass, yellow glass, green, blue, in a picture made of stained glass. On the floor, you will see the picture of what the window represents in all the colours. The sunlight shines through the blue glass, and on the floor you see a patch of blue, and on the floor you see a patch of red, and on the floor you see a patch of yellow. Now the question is the sun, when you look back to the sun through the glass, and the sun's blue. And then you look through the red glass, and the sun's red. And you look through the yellow glass, and the sun is yellow. So is the sun blue? Is the sun green? Is the sun yellow? The answer is no. It shone through a filter in the shape of a coloured glass. And there we see the differences. So they're not real differences. In other words, using this parable, God is God. But the way he shines through to us will change, and now here comes the crunch. Depending on us. We're the ones that put up the filters. So if we're kind to others, even other religions believe in this idea. I think karma, what goes around comes around. If you're kind to others, then God shines to us through the kind filter glass, and so kindness comes upon us. But if we're nasty to others, so then, so to speak, the other glass comes in its place, and we don't have such a good experience. Now, of course, this immediately raises, the $64,000 question of how bad things happen to good people, which I don't want to answer everything all in one go, but of course it does raise that question. But the principle of what I've just said so far, of how we see God in inverted commas, having different moods of kindness and anger and so on, that has been answered.
Yes.
There's a filter in place, and we are part of the reason for that filter being there.
In a way, there's a projection of God within us, right?
Correct, yeah.
It's a very powerful aphorism. Now let's go to the leader the super rabbi who's known as the Rebbe Lubavitch. Can you, Schneerson. So my question to you is, you've met Rebbe Schneerson.
I have indeed.
Let's discuss his extraordinary charisma. What did it entail? How did he communicate with you? And why call him Rebbe as opposed to Rabbi?
You've asked a number of questions.
Yes.
So let's try and deal with them. First of all, what is a Rebbe and why does he have such charisma? It's not a single answer solution to that question. Let's go back to souls again. The concept of souls. So everyone has a soul. But our teachings are that some people's souls are more comprehensive than others. And again, let's use a parable. The parable that's used very often is that of a tree. So a tree structure is the central trunk of the tree, the big central trunk. Then you have the heavy boughs coming off the central trunk. Then you have smaller, they might still be called boughs, and then they get smaller, so they become branches, and they get smaller and they become twigs. So that's the structure of a tree. So the central trunk of the tree is the source of life for the whole structure. All the sustenance that's coming from the ground is coming through the roots and up through the central trunk and being fed to all the individual parts of the tree. Now, some botanists will counter and say, but you got the leaves and they photosynthesize and the sunlight and the photosynthesis creates nutrients and that's also. Well, let's leave that aside for the moment. We could discuss that, but let's use the concept that we've just described. So you've got the central trunk. So Hasidic teachings teach that in souls as well, you have a soul who's in Hebrew is called an neshama klalit. That means a general soul, an overall soul, that is the trunk through which all the energies and life force and whatever come through to the structure, the boughs, and the smaller boughs and the branches and the twigs, and at the end of each twig there's an individual leaf or whatever, and that's the individual. So we believe that we're getting our inspiration and our spiritual sustenance from this great personality who's got in possession of this soul. And that explains what a Rebbe is. He's the one that has this soul. And he's got a relationship with everybody. Because every leaf on the tree has got a relationship. With the trunk, you only need to trace it back down, and you go to somewhere in the trunk. So that explains our relationship.
So the Rebbe is like a grand rabbi.
He's a grand rabbi. Rabbi basically means teacher or dispenser of Jewish law. But a Rebbe is much more than that. He doesn't just teach. He doesn't just dispense Jewish law. He might not even dispense Jewish law, meaning make decisions. He's more of a people's person. He's involved with people, and he inspires them, and he teaches, and he advises, and blesses all the things that people need.
So, talking about blessings, I remember I had a spiritual rabbi for many years. When he blessed me, his name was Rabbi Schimmel. When he blessed me for 2 weeks, I would feel this lightheadedness, this safety. When the Rebbe blessed you, what did you feel?
The first time I met him, I was walking on a cloud for 6 months. Absolutely. I was totally, like you say, you experienced it for 2 weeks, I experienced it for 6 months. I was lifted out of myself. lift it out myself. Then that was the first time I was on my own. The second time I went with my wife, and it wasn't quite the same experience, which puzzled me to a large extent. I actually asked one of the elder Hasidim how I understand this. So he basically said to me, the first time the Rebbe gave you a gift, now you have to work for it. That was his answer. And I met him since then a number of times. So how you feel, actually, let's go back to our point. We're the ones that put the filters in front of the sun. The way you feel and the way you get the blessings actually depends on what you put into it. Do you prepare for going in to see him? Do you try and improve yourself? Do you try and learn something that is going to be inspiring? And if you do, there's a much higher likelihood that you will be inspired back.
Now, let's discuss specifically his charisma, blessed be he, his memory. As in the human form, what was his charisma like? How could you describe it?
Well, I'll go back to a point I made before, that where does the charisma come from? It comes from the fact of him having this major soul. And this major soul bestows a certain magnetism to the person. Let's go back to our own original forefather, Abram. He went around converting people to belief in the one God in a background of total idol worship. He had unbelievable charisma in order to be able to do that. You can't just be a nobody that's just like staring at your feet in order to get that result. So the Rebbe's charisma, I believe, flowed from the power of his soul. But there's an additional point, and that is his love. His love for everyone. Actually, it wasn't just confined to Jews. He loved people. He loved everything. You know why he loved everything? Because it's part of God's creation. He was basically in love with God. So anything to do with God, he's in love with that too. So if there's a Jew who's serving God, he's loving the Jew. Even a Jew that's not serving God, he just simply exuded love.
Have you met anyone since who exuded that kind of a emotion?
Nobody. Nobody comes even near to his heels.
Did he?
I'll give you an example of how he expressed this love. Love, you can say, I love. You can be a feeling inside your chest, and it stays there. Love has to be expressed. So let's say that before Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbe made a custom for himself. To the time of Rosh Hashanah, we want a blessing for a good sweet year, right? So where does sweetness come from? Something sweet. Honey is sweet. That's why we have the custom of dipping the apple in the honey on the first night of Rosh Hashanah. What did the Rebbe do? There's a custom of having honey cake before Rosh Hashanah. So he would give out honey cake. To whom? To anyone that queued up. And in the later years, the queue for honey cake could last 6 hours. Now here's an old man. He lived till 92, nearly. And he's standing there giving out honey cake and giving blessings with the honey cake. Okay, so you love people, but you don't have to ruin your health for them.
But he did.
But he did.
Okay. Let's move to another very powerful topic, which is the beginning and the end. I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, probably, but tovu vohu. How do you say that correctly?
Tohu and bohu, yeah.
And then after death. So what I want to ask you is creation and afterlife. So can you describe a little bit to the audience about the nothing, and then what happens after we die? The nothing before the earth began. And what happens after the soul passes, or the body passes and the soul lives? What happens?
They're actually two different topics.
Yes.
Because before creation, there are no souls either. It's not like souls begin their life at the time of creation and then die. The beginning of life for the soul in terms of in this world is birth. You have birth, and the soul comes down into the body, and then the person lives their life, and the soul departs, returning to where it came from and hopefully on a higher level than it was before, because that's part of the aim of the exercise. So that's one scenario. And then there's the question of what was there before and how creation happened. So let's deal with the creation first. So based on Kabbalistic and Hasidic philosophy, the creation is described as, in Latin we say ex nihilo. In Hebrew, yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. So God created this physical universe, not just the world, the whole universe, including the remotest galaxy, which they're finding a few more now because of the various telescopes that are outside the Earth's atmosphere. All of that included did not exist. And God created it all from nothing. But what is the nothing that He created it from? It's Him. If before anything exists that we can call something, there was nothing. But the nothing really is God Himself. We call it nothing. But really, when you dig a bit deeper and scratch the surface, we should really be saying that He created nothing from something. Because He's the real something, and He created a world in which it's possible to deny Him and deny His presence. And that's nothing. If you deny God, you've created a nothingness. So really, we call it something from nothing. But He calls it nothing from something. Mm-hmm. Okay, having established the baseline. Mm-hmm. So then, what we say is God started the process, and amazingly, you've got the Tohu Vavohu is, Rashi, the commentary on the Chumash over there, says the word Tohu means to wonder. If anyone would have seen this nothingness, this vast nothingness, they would have started in absolute amazement. That's what the word means, according to Rashi. So it's totally nothing, and then God decides to start a process of creation. The amazing thing is that Genesis says the first thing that God said was, "Let there be light." Now all the scientists agree, the physicists agree, that the basis of everything is radiation. That's the basis of everything, even to the extent that Einstein came along and showed that matter is a different form of radiation, E equals mc squared. So really everything is radiation. The Bible tells us, let there be light. So we see that it agrees with everything the scientists have discovered, that light, radiation, is the very first thing. And then it develops, the matter begins to form, and then the world, the universe takes shape, and then God, the elements, whatever, come into being, and everything that we know of this universe comes into existence. But the bottom line of it is that it's something coming from nothing. But Hasidic teachings add a fantastically powerful thought. And it says like this. Let me finish this point. I know it's a little bit lengthy. They say that God is continuously creating this all the time. It's not a one-off that happened nearly 6,000 years ago, according to the biblical chronology. It's going on all the time. That God is recreating. There's a pulse of recreation every single moment of every single day to keep the world into a state of physicality. And it explains why. Because physicality is not natural. The natural state of being is God. Now, if God's going to create something that doesn't look like God, physical matter doesn't look like God, He's got to keep it like that somehow, because its natural state is to revert to being God. So He has to keep it, this table has to be pumped with godly energy every single moment to keep it as a table. Now this also chimes with modern knowledge, of science, whereby you have, the physicists who are analysing the world of the atom and even the smaller particles. They talk about particles coming into being and going out of being all the time. They even talk about that. There are particles that didn't exist and now exist, and then they cease to exist. And this is happening underlying the whole reality of the atomic world. So this is a powerful, powerful point. What it means is that God is with us every single moment of every single day, recreating and making a world for us. So he's really, really close. He's with us. He's in us. We're just part of him. And it's only because he allows us to exist by this ongoing pumping us with existence that we actually exist.
That's beautiful. What about after a person...
Right, so now you want to go on to...
How many days after? Does it take 3 days approximately?
For what?
For the soul to ascend.
To ascend? Well, we're told that the soul still retains an attachment to its home and family for the 7 days after burial, which is observed as a time of mourning called the Shiva. The word Shiva is from the word Sheva, meaning 7. 7 days of mourning, where the family stay at home and they sit on low stools and people come to the house to pray. And there is we understand that the soul retains an attachment to that home and to the family, and then after the Shiva is over, it starts receding and going back up, and then you've got a period of 30 days, and then a whole year when you have the Yortzeit, the annual anniversary of the departure of the soul, and then after a year it's taken its residence in its abode in the heavenly spheres. So there's a process. It's not a break-off point. There's a process. In addition to which, the soul's made up of 5 parts actually, and the rabbis tell us that the graveside, there is a part of the soul always remains in some level of attachment at the actual graveside.
What are the other 4 levels? And then I have another sub-question to this, which is, how much of that day, 7 days, year, Yortzeit, how much is that for us, the living, as opposed to the soul that actually is ready to go? For example, if there is a more blessed, protected environment for the soul to pass on to the next level, to ascend, can it do it faster if it wishes to? Let's say it already took care of everything down here. Does it depend?
That is absolutely true. We understand that there is a judgment of souls after they've lived their life in this world, and they're judged on, their record, let's say. So someone that has a relatively clean record is going to get through the process quicker, yes, because the tradition is that whatever judgments there are takes a year, but only for the very let's say not good people would it take so long, and therefore the tradition is to say the Kaddish prayer for a maximum of 11 months, because we don't want to imply that our parents are so bad that they need a whole year of help to sort things out. So we stop at 11 months. But there are people who are very saintly who will go straight there with a very little passage required, and it'll happen very quickly, yes.
And the other 4 parts of the soul that you mentioned?
The other part, the 5 parts of the soul that in Hebrew are Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechida. They're all mentioned somewhere in the biblical texts, especially in the book of Genesis, when man was created. The Nefesh is mentioned, that means soul. Ruach means spirit. The translations don't convey very much. Neshama also means soul. We have to explain what's the difference. Those 3 are mentioned in Genesis. And then there's 2 others, which are called Chaya and Yechida, which are very, very elevated levels.
And, for example, with Rebbe Schneerson, when his body fell apart on earth, where do you believe that his soul went to?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because when it comes to these great righteous men who are called tzaddikim in Hebrew, there is, you mentioned Zohar right at the very beginning. The Zohar tells us that these very, very big souls that we're talking about, the trunks of the tree, when they depart this world, they are actually more available to their pupils and followers after they've passed away than they were before. And the way the Zohar explains it, and it's further explained by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who was the founder of the Chabad branch of the Hasidic movement, of which Lubavitch gets its name. He explains it as follows. A normal person, their life is made up of the physical and the spiritual. So we eat, we sleep, we drink, we entertain ourselves, we have fun, play a game, and then we also go to the synagogue and we pray, and we put on the tefillin, and we fast on Yom Kippur, and we do lots of physical things and spiritual things. But when it comes to these great souls, what do they do when they're in this world? You don't see them going to watch a baseball game. You don't see them watching TV. You don't see them at the movies. You don't see them doing very much at all in the physical world. What are they doing? They're praying. They are learning Torah. They are advising their followers and other people too. They're helping people, which is not a physical activity, that's a spiritual activity. They're just spending their whole life spiritually. So it means that they're not really fully in this world even when they're alive. So since, in a certain sense, their body holds their soul back, because they want to be just spiritual. But a person has a body, you've got to eat, you've got to sleep, you've got to have bodily functions. But once that body is gone and the soul is released, it's no longer held back by the body, and it can now function even better than before. And it doesn't just function in the higher worlds, it functions in the lower worlds as well. Hence, you get people visiting the Rebbe's resting place, and they ask for blessings, and these blessings come true more often than not immediately. People ask for something, and they turn around and walk out of the Rebbe's resting place, and they meet someone that has a solution for their problem. So we see that these great souls, they are just as powerful, if not more so, in this world after they've passed away than they were before.
Passed on, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Rabbi. Now, Rabbi Schneerson was of Belarusian descent, and we discussed before the interview slightly. I just wanted to ask you, where did the Russians and the Belarusians and the Ukrainian Jews come from? So they start in Israel, go to Spain, and then go there. What was their historical passage up?
I am not a student of those aspects of Jewish history, but my understanding is that after the destruction of the first temple, most Jews were taken captive to Babylon, Bavel in Hebrew. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. That more or less maps onto Iraq today. So most Jews ended up over there. A small remnant remained in Israel. So the question is then, what happened afterwards? After the rebuilding of the temple, that's the second temple now, a number of Jews came back from Babylon and settled back in Israel. But the rest of them didn't. The majority stayed in Babylon. The minority came back to Israel. So you had basically two communities. And then the Romans came, and they destroyed the second temple and caused a further scattering. So my understanding is that from Iraq, which is Babylon, Jews started to move. So some of them started to move north, and some started to move south and westwards across North Africa. The ones that started moving north went through to Turkey and the southern regions of Russia, and moved gradually, slowly, Greece, slowly moved into Europe. And they became the Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenaz is the Hebrew for Germany. So they became the Jews of Europe, let's say. The others migrated southwards, so you got the Yemeni Jews and the other Jews that lived in Arab countries to the south of Iran, Persia, and some came round North Africa. So you had Jews in Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, and some of the Moroccans went north to Spain. And some of the Europeans went south to Spain, and they met in Spain. So in Spain you had an Ashkenazi community, that means European, and a Sephardi community, the ones that came from North Africa. So hence you got that geographical, and the customs somehow gelled as slightly different between the Sephardi, the North African Jews, and the Asian Jews, and the European Jews. So we have mild differences in custom.
In a way, though, Jews are, in a way, also from the Asian continent, right? So could we consider ourselves partially Asian?
Does it have meaning to say that?
I don't know.
What difference would it make to call us Asian? Somebody pointed out a very interesting thing. If you look at the map, the globe, so Israel is at the junction of three great landmasses. You've got Europe to the north and northwest. You've got Asia to the east, as far as India and so on. The Jews got to India, all these places. And then to the south, you've got Africa. And it's like a bit like a clover leaf with three leaves. And Israel's bang in the middle. And there must be some spiritual meaning to that we have a message for everybody. Or you could map it onto the three sons of Noah.
I'm glad I asked the question because your answer is really the great answer, the really good answer. Let me ask you about the breastplate. So the breastplate had the 12 tribes. They each had a stone, whether it's amethyst or sapphire, which actually was lapis lazuli at that time, and another 10 stones. How did the breastplate work to communicate with God, and how important were these stones, which we now collect for good wealth and good wishes, for that communication?
I can share with you how the system worked. I can't share with you why each tribe had that particular stone and that particular color stone. That's quite a deep study to understand, the Kabbalistic truth behind why that tribe had that particular stone. But I will share with you the method with this communication with God, as you say. It was more of God's communication with us. It was that there was a problem, a question, some kind of guidance was needed. Very often it was in the form of whether to go to war. That somehow or other the Jewish leadership, the Sanhedrin, which is the great court, or the king, needed to know whether they should wage a certain war or not. So the method was that this breastplate, as you mentioned, just to clarify for the listeners, the breastplate we're talking about is that of the high priest, that he wore round his neck, hanging a kind of square shape, hanging on his chest. And there were 12 settings, and the settings were set, each one of them with a different color stone and a different type of stone. And on these stones, it was written the name of the tribe that stone belonged to. So the 12 tribes, and their names are etched into the stone. And in addition, you also it had to be that each stone had the same number of letters. In order to achieve that, they had to add a couple of more words, and these words were Shiftei Ko, that means the tribes of God. So Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, etc., the 12 tribes, and then interspersed with the letters, the names, you had the Shin and the Bet and the Tet and Yud of Shiftei to make up the numbers, and Yud K, which is God's name. Now, having the whole set of the alphabet, the alphabet is the same as the English alphabet, right? Same in Greek as well. Alpha, beta, an interesting connection between all of them. So you got all the letters of the alphabet on these stones, and therefore a message can be sent or displayed by highlighting one of the letters. So a letter would light up, and the way the high priest would stand there facing a direction of another priest standing in front of him, and so that the high priest could not see what was on his chest, because looking down he's not going to see. So the priest who was opposite him could read what was going on. The man who was asking could be the king, or the head of the high court, the Sanhedrin, would stand behind the high priest and ask the question. And on the breastplate, the lights would light up, the letters would light up, and spell the answer. Like if the answer was, go to war, they would see these letters light up, and with the message, and they would get the answer. Or don't go. Go or don't go. You can, as simple as that, go or don't go.
Is there anything of that, is there anything similar to the breastplate and that communication method that's currently available in any way?
Well, you talked about revered before, so that's one of the replacements. Because a tzaddik, we mentioned the word before, the righteous man, and explained how he's totally connected with the divine. He's able to get the divine messages and give answers to people with that divine inspiration that guides them in their life.
Without the breastplate?
Without the breastplate.
Is there any idea where the breastplate could be, or shards of it?
We have a tradition that the tabernacle in the desert that was built by Moses is actually hidden somewhere in the temple site. We do not know where.
Okay. And as we begin to conclude the interview, I have just a couple of more things. How important is sensuality to divinity? And what I mean by that is because, of course, children, the creation of the world, the creation of children continues our life force, our world. How important are those two things to each other in terms of connecting to divinity?
Well, I can only answer you by declaring what is the first commandment that God gave Adam.
Respect your parents.
Be fruitful and multiply. He made him into a mathematician. He said multiply, right? So be fruitful and multiply. That's fundamental. That's the first of God's teachings. Be fruitful and multiply. Have children. Now you can't have children without some sensuous experience. Need I say more?
No.
So marriage is a cardinal, what's the right word? A cardinal exhortation from God as part of Judaism that one should get married, and as soon as possible. Traditionally, the rabbis say one should at 18 be already thinking of getting married, or even getting married. Okay, we know that nowadays people don't do that so much, and they're a bit older, but by their early 20s, one should get married with an aim to having children and not practicing birth control. And that is divinity, and that's spirituality. It brings its own divinity and spirituality with it. And the marital relationship is seen in Judaism as not just a necessary and good thing to indulge in, but it's a spiritual thing as well. It's in fact the relationship between husband and wife is described as being kiddushin, which means sanctification. That the husband and wife building a home together, it's done in a way of sanctity, and that is the word that's used for when a man betroths a wife. He's mekadesh her, that means he sanctifies her as his wife. It's a holy union. So it's seen as central to the whole of Judaism.
And the final question I have for you is, what makes life joyful for the many people out there who don't feel the joy?
The most effective way to feel joy is to do something for someone else. To be less self-centered and more other-centered. People who are only involved in their own self-gratification, in the end, are not very happy. But if you dedicate yourself, I'm not saying one has to dedicate one's whole life to it, but those who are dedicated, a bit at least, to helping other people, some kind of hobby, some kind of pastime, help the homeless. There's enough causes that I don't need to make any suggestions. That is the way to happiness.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
I would just like to add that I really I'm extremely grateful that you asked me and honored me by giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts with an audience. Hopefully there'll be more than one person listening. That means more than you. And we hope to meet again on good occasions. And thank you very much.
Thank you.